My ex abandoned our kids for a date, blew child support on her boyfriend, lied about being broke. Now I have full custody and she's losing everything. I'm a 38-year-old man, and it's been about a year now since my ex-wife, who's 37, and I finalized our divorce. We have 2 kids together, one is 10 and the other is 7. I share partial custody with her, which means the kids spend half the month living with me. Even though we split the time pretty evenly, I still have to pay child support for the days they're with her. My income is quite a bit higher than hers, so I'm also on the hook for alimony payments on top of that. To be honest, the divorce wasn't exactly amicable. We're not on friendly terms at all. I was the one who ended up filing because, during the last few years of our marriage, all we did was fight. It got so bad that my ex completely changed into someone I barely recognized. I still remember our last blowout fight. She screamed at me, said she regretted ever marrying me. After hearing that, I packed up my things, left, and started the divorce process. She never even tried to reach out or make things right after I walked out, and now, a full year has gone by since everything became official. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, word got back to me, through a mutual friend, that she'd started dating someone new. I won't lie, it stunned to hear she moved on so quickly. But there wasn't anything I could really do about it, so I just let it go. I never brought it up with her. At that point, the only conversations we had were strictly about the kids. Nothing else. That's how it's been for the last 6 months, very cold, very businesslike. Sure, it hurt seeing how fast she seemed to replace our life together, but at the end of the day, I knew she was still a good mom to our kids, and that mattered more to me than my pride. However, something happened recently that completely changed the way I see her. It shook me to my core and made me realize she might not even deserve to be around our children. About 10 days ago, I had to leave town for a business trip. I was supposed to be back in 3 days. Technically, during the second day of my trip, it was scheduled for the kids to come stay with me. It was my turn. Knowing I wouldn't be home, I had asked her in advance if she could keep them for just 3 extra days until I returned. She agreed without any fuss, and I even have screenshots of her saying it was no problem. So I left town feeling confident everything was covered. On the second evening of my trip, though, I got a call that made my stomach drop. It was my son on the line, asking me where I was. He said their mom had dropped them off at my house, but nobody was answering the door. They'd been standing out there ringing the bell for about 15 minutes in the freezing cold. I was completely blindsided. I told him to hang tight and suggested they head to the neighbor's house for shelter while I figured out what was going on. Unfortunately, my neighbors were out of town too. The street I live on is still pretty new, and most of the houses haven't been moved into yet. Only the house directly across from mine is occupied. An elderly couple lives there, but they weren't home either that day. The rest of the street was practically deserted. I'd only moved into this neighborhood recently, so I didn't have any other close contacts nearby. My heart was pounding as I realized there was no easy fix. I told my son to stay on the line while I quickly called his mom. When I reached her, I asked her, practically begged her, to please come back and pick up the kids. I didn't want them sitting out in the freezing cold any longer. I thought she'd be horrified when she realized what had happened and would rush back right away. But what she said next left me absolutely stunned. She coldly told me that the kids were my responsibility now because, technically, it was my turn to have them. I was speechless. I started pleading with her, not for myself, but for our kids. I asked her to think about them, not me. Instead, she hung up on me. With shaking hands, I sent her a desperate text, asking again if she could just please go get them and bring them back to her place. Her response? She said she couldn't because she was on her way to a date night with her boyfriend. They were celebrating 8 months together. Meanwhile, my children were sitting outside in the freezing cold. By the time all this back and forth happened, more than 35 minutes had gone by since my son first called me. They had been standing out there all that time, freezing. Out of options and time, I ended up calling Child Protective Services, CPS, and explained the whole situation to them. Thankfully, they acted quickly. Within minutes, someone showed up at my house. Since my kids were too young to find their way anywhere by themselves, they didn't know any bus routes or how to get to my parents' place on their own. The CPS took responsibility for them and personally drove them out to my parents' house, which is located just outside the city. Neither my ex-wife's parents nor mine live nearby. Her parents actually passed away long before we even got married, and any other relatives I have in town either weren't willing or able to take them in on such short notice. My parents' house was truly the safest option. I also went ahead and reported my ex-wife for child neglect. When the officers found my boys, they were huddled on the front steps of my house, trying to keep warm by wrapping themselves in my younger son's small blanket. I can't even describe the wave of guilt that hit me when I heard about the state they were found in. But at least knowing they were safe at my parents' place gave me some peace of mind. Later that same night, I found out my ex-wife had been arrested for negligence. It wasn't some huge felony charge, just a misdemeanor, but it was something. I went to sleep that night feeling a strong sense of relief, knowing my kids were out of danger and that my ex-wife would finally have to answer for what she did. Before going to bed, I also called my lawyer. We started the paperwork to file for full custody as soon as I got back home. If everything went well, that would mean I'd have my kids permanently, and on top of that, I'd finally be done paying child support. Honestly, I couldn't wait to fight for them and teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget. For the next couple of days, we didn't speak at all. I stayed focused on getting back home and making sure my kids were okay. Once my trip wrapped up, the first thing I did was drive straight to see them. We had a long talk about everything that happened. I apologized to them for not being there in person when they needed me most and promised them that nothing like this would ever happen again, because I was going to fight for full custody and make sure they'd always be safe with me from now on. I'll never forget the look on my oldest son's face when I told him that. The relief and happiness he showed told me everything I needed to know. I was doing the right thing. All this time, I had honestly believed my ex-wife was a decent mom. She wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but I never thought she was actually bad to our kids. When we were still married, she seemed to care about them, and even after the divorce, I never heard anything from the kids that made me question how things were at her place. But when I asked my son why he seemed so relieved about not having to live with his mom anymore, he hesitated. He looked uncomfortable and finally admitted that their mother had forbidden him from talking to me about what was going on at her house. That right there sent alarm bells ringing in my head, so I pressed him a little, encouraging him to be honest. Eventually, it all came spilling out. Turns out, for a long time now, both my sons had been miserable living with her. She'd become incredibly strict and not in any reasonable way. All of a sudden, she cut out all candy and junk food from their diet while they stayed with her for half the month. And it wasn't just about the sweets, she had them eating the same bland meals over and over. They called it sick food, not because it was cool, but because it was the kind of bland porridge and oats I usually feed them when they're actually sick and need something easy on their stomachs. Every single day, lunch and dinner were the same miserable, tasteless meals. Only on weekends did they get anything slightly different, and even then, it was nothing more exciting than plain toast with some dip. Their mother claimed she was doing this for their health, but I couldn't wrap my head around how starving them of real food, no meat, no fresh vegetables, for half a month was supposed to be good for them. And while I get that too much candy and junk isn't healthy, I personally think giving kids a little bit here and there actually helps them have a healthy relationship with food. Completely banning it only causes problems down the line. It didn't stop at the food either. They told me they weren't allowed to have friends over when they were at her place. No sleepovers, no playdates, all of that had to wait until they were staying with me. Whenever she took them shopping, they weren't allowed to pick out anything they wanted, no toys, no books, no new clothes, not even something simple like chicken nuggets from the grocery store. She'd just buy what she needed while they stood silently to the side, and if they asked for anything, she'd snap at them. What broke my heart the most was finding out she had forbidden them from telling me any of this. That's why, for so long, I had no idea how bad things were getting at their mother's house. After hearing all that, I knew I couldn't just sit on it. I had to confront her and get to the bottom of why she was treating our kids this way. When I called her, she started off by screaming at me for reporting her to the police and calling CPS. I brushed all that aside. I wasn't interested in arguing about that. I wanted to talk about the real issue, our kids. I asked her straight up why our sons were complaining about being hungry, not being allowed to enjoy basic things, and being treated like an afterthought. None of it made sense. I pay her a good amount of child support, enough that she should easily be able to provide for them, and on top of that, she gets alimony. With the money I send, she should be living comfortably without cutting corners, especially where our kids are concerned. At first, she tried to brush it off, saying she was between jobs and just couldn't afford to spend extra on the kids right now. But that excuse didn't add up. Between the child support and the alimony I provide, she shouldn't even need another job to keep the kids well cared for. I pushed back harder, and after a few minutes of back and forth, she finally snapped and told me it wasn't any of my business what she did with the money. Then she hung up on me. That hit a nerve. Because that money? It's not hers. It's supposed to be for our children, for their needs, not her personal expenses. It was clear to me at that point she had been lying, and probably using the money for herself instead of the kids. After talking it over with my lawyer, we decided we weren't just going to file for full custody anymore, we were also going to sue her for child abuse and neglect. Because that's exactly what it was. She already had criminal charges pending for abandoning them in the freezing cold while I was away, and now she was facing a civil lawsuit too. It's been about a week and a half since all that went down. A couple of days ago, she finally got served with the papers. And the very same day she was served, she called me up, putting on the waterworks. She hadn't reached out once while all this was brewing, but now that she realized she might actually lose custody and the child support money that came with it, suddenly she was desperate to talk. I could smell the fake desperation from a mile away. She started sobbing about how she couldn't survive without the kids. But deep down, I knew it wasn't them she cared about, it was the cash that came with them. I told her flat out that she'd made this bet herself, and that I didn't trust her with our children anymore. That's when she tried to spin it, saying she had only been messing with me a little, and she was planning to come back for the kids anyway. I didn't believe a word of it. I told her that no amount of crocodile tears was going to change how I felt. And that's when she finally admitted what I already suspected. She said she needed the kids because without them, she couldn't get the child support money she relied on to survive while she was between jobs. Hearing her admit that just made my stomach turn. It was never really about loving our kids, it was about keeping the money coming in. I was about ready to hang up when I heard someone else in the background, one of her friends, or maybe even her lawyer, yelling at her, telling her to forget about fighting for the money and to focus on dealing with the lawsuit instead. Suddenly, she changed her tune. She dropped the fake crying act and started whining about how I shouldn't be suing her because she was already under so much stress. She said the criminal case and the custody battle were enough and that I was just piling on. But at that point, I didn't care anymore. She wasn't the victim here. My kids were. When I hit her with the child protection lawsuit, my ex started whining about how unfair it all was. She accused me of doing it just to hurt her because, in her words, she'd moved on and I hadn't. I actually laughed out loud at how delusional she sounded. There was no point arguing with someone that deep in denial, so I just hung up the call. After that, I didn't bother reaching out to her again. I put all my energy into my work and into taking care of my kids. Deep down, I already knew there was no way I was ever letting my kids go back to living with her, no matter what. I also knew that with full custody coming my way, those child support payments were about to be a thing of the past. Since then, I've been lining up babysitters for when I'm away at work. For now, my mom moved in with me to help out, so the boys have someone safe and loving looking after them until I get back each day. Then, just yesterday, while I was at work, my mom called me, sounding stressed. She told me to get home as fast as possible. Apparently, my ex-wife had shown up at my doorstep and refused to leave without talking to me. I couldn't just ditch work right then, I had a meeting lined up. So, I told my mom to hand her the phone. When I got on the call with my ex, I laid it out clearly. If she didn't leave and kept acting crazy, I'd have no choice but to file for a restraining order too, and trust me, that would make things even worse for her. She didn't respond to that threat. Instead, she immediately jumped into playing the victim. She accused me of ruining her life on purpose and begged me to have some compassion and drop the lawsuit because, according to her, she couldn't handle the stress of everything happening at once, the charges, the custody battle, and now the new lawsuit. Meanwhile, I had already talked to my boss and co-workers and explained that I might need to take some time off for all the court dates coming up. They were supportive, as long as my work didn't suffer too much. But my ex? She whined about not having a job and not being able to afford a lawyer or deal with the constant legal meetings. I reminded her, point blank, of the same thing she told me when she abandoned our kids in the freezing cold. This is your problem, not mine. Yeah, I'll admit that was said out of pure spite. But honestly, after everything she put me and the kids through, I figured she deserved it. The reality was, she'd been getting a steady stream of alimony and child support from me every month. Yet she still managed to deprive my boys of a decent home, good meals, and basic care while terrifying them into keeping quiet about it. So frankly, my being a little rude should have been the least of her worries. But of course, she just kept crying like a toddler on the phone, accusing me of being horrible to her. She sobbed that losing custody of her kids was bad enough, and now I was kicking her while she was down by suing her too. She said it wasn't fair. And even though I told her straight up that there was no turning back now, I still couldn't help but feel a little guilty after that call. Update 1. Hey everyone, 2 days have passed since I last posted, and after a lot of thinking, plus talking it through with my parents and reading all of your comments, I realized there's absolutely no reason for me to feel guilty anymore. It's clear now that the money I'd been sending her, meant for our kids, was never being spent on them. She was spending it all on herself. My ex and I don't follow each other on social media, and I don't usually keep in touch with our old college friends either. My work keeps me too busy. But after talking to my parents, I decided to reach out to a few of our mutual friends, just to see if they had any insights. After I posted last time, my kids had mentioned something else too. Apparently, most weekends, she'd be gone for hours, sometimes overnight, leaving them with random neighbors or distant relatives. They had been trying to hide this from me because, I'm sure, she scared them into silence. The more I heard, the more I realized I had to dig a little deeper. I'd been avoiding snooping on her life because I believed that once we divorced, she deserved her privacy. Big mistake. Using a friend's account, I checked out her social media. And what I found absolutely floored me. Her profiles were packed with photos of her partying in clubs, lounging on beaches, taking fancy trips, and posting all kinds of glamorous vacation selfies with her boyfriend. It looked like something out of an influencer's page, not a struggling single mom's life. Some of my friends admitted they had seen it too but didn't think it was their place to tell me. And honestly, I don't blame them. I had pushed everyone away after the divorce because staying in touch with mutual friends just reminded me of her. But now, getting back in touch with my old circle, I can see the truth and it's crystal clear. She was lying through her teeth the whole time. She wasn't struggling, she was living it up while neglecting our kids and hoarding the money I sent for herself. Meanwhile, she was feeding my boys scraps and denying them the basic things every child should have. After learning all this, whatever guilt I felt completely vanished. She deserves every bit of what's happening to her. Update 2. Hey folks, just another quick update. The lawsuit is ongoing, and we just had our second hearing scheduled for the day after tomorrow. My ex-wife completely gave up on the custody battle. She said she was willing to terminate her parental rights because she couldn't afford a lawyer for 3 different cases at once. So now, the kids are fully under my custody, permanently. For the first time in a long time, I can finally breathe freely without worrying about them. As for the lawsuit, it's going very much in my favor so far and I'm confident it'll stay that way. Funny thing, her boyfriend actually called me today. I guess he thought I might soften up if he told me their sad little story. Instead, it just made me angrier. He said she was working so hard after quitting her job post-divorce, doing freelance work and struggling to support herself, her kids, and also him. Yeah, you heard that right. She'd been paying for his tuition out of her so-called savings while pretending she had no money for our kids. I asked him if all those beach vacations, clubbing nights, and luxury hotels were part of working hard, and he couldn't even answer me. He kept trying to say it was all for appearances. I hung up and blocked him immediately. Now, everything makes sense, all the missing money, the neglect, the excuses. And she's going to pay for it in court. Update 3. Hey guys, long time no see, and thank you all so much for your support. I'm happy to report that life is looking up. I'm doing a lot better now, and more importantly, so are my boys. They're happy here, settled, and barely even mention their mother anymore. Of course, she lost the case and now she owes me a huge amount in damages. No more partying, no more beach trips, no more blowing child support money at clubs. She's finally facing the consequences of her selfish choices. Honestly, watching a woman in her late 30s act like a reckless teenager was pathetic to witness. But now, it's not my problem anymore. Once again, thank you all for your encouragement, your advice, and your kindness throughout this nightmare. I can finally close this chapter and focus on giving my kids the life they deserve.